Good to have you this morning. I'm going to start with 1 Corinthians 6, verses 19 and 20, which says, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you were bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's." Amen. Thank you, Barb. Wasn't that nice? Let's pray. Father, thank you again for your Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you for our confidence being built on him and not on ourselves. We thank you for salvation. We praise you for being the glorifying and wonderful God that you are. We ask, Lord, that you make this hour together just a time of building each other up in the truth, finding confidence, joy, and conviction in the Word, and standing in your everlasting love, Lord. And we do again give you the glory and all the praise for our eternal life, and even for the fact that we stand on your word here today together. May you bless those who can't be here, and we ask, Lord, for continued encouragement as we just look to you to live our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to point out a couple things from the bulletin. Don't forget, we got teen banquet still scheduled for June 13th, and there's information in the bulletin on that. And there's also a sign-up, teenagers. It's on the board out in the foyer. And then there's also a table out there for Chelsea's upcoming bridal shower, okay? And that's exciting as well. So we got info there for you. What did I say? Oh, you can watch it. Oh, the virtual bridal shower. I left out that word. I shouldn't leave out that word. We use the word virtual, household name these days. But yes, that's on there on the on the website or on Facebook. Is that on Facebook? Oh, that's pretty neat. Okay. We also have, let's see, so an update on Wednesday nights. Wednesday night was good. We had 5 different time slots Wednesday, a total of about 40, 45 people over the course of the night, which is about what we would normally run on a Wednesday night adult prayer meeting anyway. I think what we're going to do this week, I'm glad, and I want to thank Ben. Ben just does such a good job updating the website, keeping everybody informed. So I think I'm going to ask Ben if he will remove the 8 o'clock time slot this upcoming Wednesday night. We'll have 4 time slots instead of 5. And then, Ben, if you could add 2 more household lines to each of the remaining 4. Okay, we'll try that this Wednesday. Of course, everything's subject to change, but we'll try that. So for Wednesday's prayer meeting, go back into the website. If you have trouble doing that, just call me. I would be glad to put your name wherever you'd like. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we sing off the screen, and I'll get out of your way. I have decided to follow Jesus. 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 No turning back, no turning back. Oh, world behind me, the cross before me. mind singing, young people?
Lord Jesus, I long to be perfectly whole. I want you forever to live in my soul. Break down every idol, cast out every foe. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Lord Jesus, look down on your throne in the skies and help me to make a complete sacrifice. I give up myself and whatever I know. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Lord Jesus, for this I most humbly entreat. I wait, blessed Lord, at your crucified feet. By faith for my cleansing, I let your blood flow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Lord Jesus, before you I patiently wait. Come now and within me a new heart create. To those who have sought you, you never said no. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me and I shall be whiter than snow.
Yeah, thank you. That last line has always been my favorite of that hymn. To those who have sought you, you've never said no. Nobody who has ever sought the Lord Jesus Christ for salvation has been rejected. No one. Absolutely no one. Jesus saves. He truly does. We're in 1 Corinthians, and we're marching through this letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthian church, and we're going to be in chapter 11. You know, we wrapped up a section on what happens when freedoms and convictions collide and how to handle that so that you can still maintain unity within the local church. And chapters 8, 9, and 10 dealt with that. Those are very important principle to learn in light of what's coming up in chapter 11. And need to apply these principles that he's teaching, and the Corinthians needed to apply these principles. Now, what do medals and ribbons and bars that you see like on a military uniform or the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or anything like that, what do all those do? What do they display? Well, those medals, those bars, those are all displays of how a soldier or a scout or somebody has been honored. He or she has been honored in a certain way, and they give a medal, they give a bar to be displayed, okay? And so the individual wears the honor every time he or she puts on the uniform. And there's a place for that kind of honor. Scripture says there's a place for that kind of honor. If you know Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're trusting Him and Him alone for eternal life and trusting in nobody else. The Bible uses the word Christian. It says that's being born again. It uses a lot of terminology for that. But if that describes you, then wearing honor is something very different than the soldier or the scout. I want you to notice something. We're picking it up at verse 2 because chapter 11, verse 1 actually goes with chapter 10. So we're picking it up at verse 2. He says, "Now I praise you, brethren." Now that's encouraging because this letter is a letter written to a church that just had all kinds of problems. They had just botched up so many things and had so many issues because of that Paul is writing this letter to them. He wrote this letter to them to help them get through those issues and correct them. And yet, in the midst of all that, there's a whole lot of correcting going on, spiritual spankings left and right in this letter, and yet he says, "I praise you, brethren." He found something to praise them with. Jesus did this to the churches in Revelation, in the first 3 chapters of Revelation. Those were some churches that some of them had issues too, but in most of them he was able to say, "I commend you for this." That's encouraging, isn't it? And even Paul found something to praise the Corinthian church family for. It's something else to only receive criticism, or to only give criticism, to stay quiet about anything praiseworthy, stay quiet, say nothing, say nothing, say nothing. Time goes by, and then a criticism pops up, and that's what you jump on. Right? Paul didn't do that. He didn't do that. He had praise to offer as well, which made his critique that much more worthy, right? That worth listening to. What did he praise him for? Well, he says, "You remember me in all things." For one, they did remember him. Remember, this letter, he wrote letters to them in response to letters they wrote to him. They wrote to him asking him questions, but they were evidently expressing their care for him as well. And he remembered that. So he praised him for it. And then he says, "And keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you." They do that as well. By tradition, he just means the teachings from God. And he called them traditions. And they kept them. Now, they didn't always keep them well. They botched some of those traditions and teachings up. But they were observing those teachings. They didn't just drop them. And he commended them for that as well. And then he goes into verse 3 with the word "but" or "however." And this is what Jesus did to the churches in Revelation. He says, "I commend you for this. However, this complaint I do have." And that's what Paul's doing. He says, I praise you for this. However, chapter 11, verses 2 through 16 are one of those sections in Scripture that are tough. This was a nightmare to outline. Peter said of the Apostle Paul's writings, he said, some of his writings are hard to understand. I think Peter probably read 1 Corinthians 11 right before he wrote that. Okay? This would have been one of them anyway. This is one of those tough ones. However, I want to encourage you before we get into it, the principle is really not that tough. Okay? The principle, the biblical, God-ordained principle of this text is found in verse 3. Everything else hinges off this principle. All right? Verse 3 says, "But I want you to know," because evidently they weren't practicing what he's about to teach them. He says, "I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ. The head of woman is man. The head of Christ is God. Right? The principle here has to do with the local church because the entire letter has to do with the local church. And the principle is simply this: within God's design of the local church, men and women are different in their roles. In their roles, we have the principle of a local church hierarchy. Okay? So keep that in mind when we read, the head of every man is Christ, and he's not talking about mankind. That's a different word. This is actually the word for a male adult, a man. Okay? The head of every man is Christ. He's talking about within the local church, and the head of woman is man. Now, this is one of those texts that is extremely unpopular in today's world. Okay? The world hates the idea behind this. In fact, this is one of those texts that even women in church sit up straight when it's read and cock their head, and maybe one eyebrow goes up, and they wonder, what are you going to say next? Misunderstood. This this teaching is extremely unpopular, and it should be when it's misunderstood. But even when it's understood, this does not go over with some very well. But we need to understand this. This has to do with men and women in the church and the roles that God designed for them and how they play out those roles. Okay? And the roles are different. Not better, not worse. Not superior, not inferior. Different. Where people go wrong is they get the idea that in God's design, men are better than women. That's not true. Okay? Remember, this is within the local church. There are two institutions in which God has given headship. That means leading authority to the man. Two and only two. Within the family and within the church. Outside of that, I've had female supervisors and bosses. There's nothing ungodly with that. I've been pulled over by female police officers. Nothing ungodly about that. Okay? There's all kinds of places that we see women having authority. What God is saying is that over a man within the local church and within the family, that's not one of the places. And here we're talking about the church. And the reason is not because men are better than women. The idea has to do with the fact that women are to voluntarily rank themselves under a male's leadership in the church. Not because he's better. A general has a higher rank than a corporal, but the corporal might be a better man. In my home, God gave me the leading authority in the home, but Naomi's actually a better person than I am. So this has really nothing to do with better or worse. The truth is, this has to do with a hierarchy without superiority. Unless you forget that, he always refers to the Trinity when it comes to this, because look what it says in the last part of verse 3. And the head of Christ, the Son, is God. That is the Father. Right? The role of a husband and wife, the role of men and women in the church, are wonderful mirrors of what's happening within the Trinity of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The Father, as the head and the authority within the Trinity, gives his will, carried out by the Son and the power of the Holy Spirit. Now let me ask you, which one of those in the three is better than the other two? That is a hierarchy without superiority. And that's the way God designed it. So men have the leading authority within the church, but they also have the responsibility that goes with it. Leading authority does not mean dictatorship. Okay? We don't need a bunch of Saddam Husseins in the pulpits. That's not what this means. It also doesn't mean women don't have a voice. All right? So let's take a look at number one, how in church, men and women have different roles as displayed in three different areas. Okay, verses 4 through 7 point out the first area. It says, every man praying or prophesying. Prophesying is giving forth God's word before his word was in print. Okay, the church started before the word was done. And so a lot of biblical knowledge came from the gift of prophecy when God would give somebody a truth that hadn't yet been inspired in writing yet. And when somebody had this gift, they gave it forth at church. Okay? So every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head, but every woman who prays or prophesies, there you go, see, a woman could pray and prophesy. More on that later in this book. With her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same, as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. Okay? First of all, in church, men and women have different roles as displayed in symbolism. In symbolism. The head covering is the symbol here. The head covering back then in the Corinthian church, they didn't actually wear hats. They would have just used a piece of fabric, a cloth that both men and women draped over their heads. Okay? But head covering is a general term. Right? And the head covering is a symbol of the spiritual truth. The spiritual principle doesn't change, and that is men and women have different roles, and headship lies with the man in the church. Okay, that's the truth that God spells out that doesn't change. Right? It is symbolized here in this text with head coverings. All right, so in verse 4, every man or prophesying having his head covered, his physical head, dishonors his head. That's his spiritual head. That is God's headship over him. His headship as leader in the church. So you got the physical and the spiritual mentioned. Every woman who prays or prophesies with her physical head uncovered without some kind of veil or fabric draped over her head or a hat or something like that, dishonors her spiritual head, that is her role within the church in the hierarchy of headship. She dishonors that. And as the same as if her head were shaved. Now, he's not saying there that a woman's hair is the equivalent of having a hat on. What he's saying is that the woman, in not wearing a covering or a hat, if she prays or prophesies in church, it might as well be shaved. She might as well shave her head. That's what he's saying. Okay? He's saying it's shameful. That is, so the hat, the covering, it's just symbolism, is what it is. A symbol of God's design of hierarchy without superiority within the church. But in church, men and women have different roles as displayed in something else as well. Look at verses 8 and 9. It says, for man is not from woman, but woman from man. Nor man was created for the woman, but woman for the man. So their roles are displayed in creation. Creation. This whole idea of hierarchy without superiority goes all the way back to Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. Okay? Man, it says in verse 8, is not from woman, but woman from man. That means that Eve came from Adam. He was created first, then he was made to sleep, and then from his rib, God made Eve. That was done on purpose. God did that on purpose. That was his order. That was his design. And then that comes out in the role of the family and in the role of the church. Right? But then notice verse 9. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. That does not demean women. Adam went about naming all the animals. Named every one of them because God told him to. Not because God couldn't name them. He can name them better than Adam, but he gave Adam that responsibility for a purpose. So Adam, after naming all these animals that were male and female, came away from that project and said, there is something different with them. They got something I don't have. And there's not one like me. That ox, there's two kinds of ox. And he has that one, and she has him, and there's nothing like that for me. That's what he saw. Once he saw that, then God made him to sleep and created the woman to complete them. So you see, it's not demeaning, ladies, to say that Eve was made for Adam. That's actually an uplifting thing for Eve. Adam wasn't complete. Now, don't take this to mean that if you are single, you're not complete until you're married. Not at all. It doesn't mean that. We're talking about the human race here, the way God created humanity. But it was an honor to round out humanity by God's perfect, complete design when he created Eve. So creation even gives a credibility to the design in the church. All right? And then we're going to skip verses 10 through 11 and 13 for a moment. We'll come back to it, but I want you to go down to verse 14. I want you to see another way in which these roles are displayed, and that is in nature. Verse 14, does not even nature itself teach that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. Now, here's a place that it could actually, hair could mean in the place of a veil, because this could actually be translated accurately that her hair is given instead of a covering. But here's what we see here. Nature. Now, nature, that doesn't mean birds and trees and the sunset and the ocean and things like that. This is one of those really tough and debatable meanings on what Paul means by this. This is one of those, this whole section is one where the preacher says, Paul, can you have elaborated a little bit more and not held so much back? Here's likely what Paul means by this text. When he's talking about long hair and short hair. When he says, does not even nature itself teach regarding long and short hair on men and women, it probably means is nature refers to the natural customs of the time and place that those customs exist. That's probably what he's talking about. He's saying, looking around you, the natural customs of where you're at teach you something about the difference between men and women. All right? In this case, he's talking about long and short hair. That is a relative thing. Now we know, here's why I say this. He's talking about natural customs and where you live. Because long hair on a man in and of itself is not sinful or a violation of God's principles, because God told the Nazarites, don't cut your hair. Samson had long hair. Samuel was a godly man. He was a Nazarite. Long hair. So the long hair in and of itself is not an issue, right? But the fact that God told the Israelite Nazarites to grow your hair long was because of what? It was their natural custom to keep it short. That was just the way they did it. Right? But even long and short hair, that's relative, isn't it? The preacher of 1975, with a style that was well kept, well combed, and considered conservative, would have been a shaggy rebel in 1955, all right? It's very relative here. Same with short hair on a woman. Just because a woman has hair off her length doesn't mean that off her shoulder length doesn't mean that she's somehow masculine. Not at all. The Spartans, those warriors, grew their hair long and then wore it back when they went to battle. It was part of their uniform, and nobody considered that effeminate. Go tell a Spartan he's a girly man. See how that works for you. So it's a relative term, but the idea is simply that look around at your customs. What's natural in your customs? You will notice that the customs differentiate between men and women. And whatever those customs are, don't confuse those. Because if you confuse them, you're actually going against God's design that men and women have different roles in different settings. That's what he's probably saying in verse 14 and 15. All right. Okay, now let's back up. I want you to see number 2, men and women. We've said they have different roles, but men and women are equal beings. Different roles, but there's no superiority here. They're actually equal. Did you know in Genesis 2, when it says God created man and woman, Adam and Eve, and they shall be one flesh. Do you know that that language means they will be face to face, equals? Do you know that? Okay. Not one is a dictator and the other is like another child in the family that just does what she's told. No, they actually are equal beings, in which one recognizes the authority of leadership and the responsibility of leadership goes to the man. But they're equal. And this is displayed as well. Verse 11 says, let's read that. It says, nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor woman independent of man in the Lord. First of all, men and women are equal beings as displayed in their dependence. Their dependence. The man is not independent of a woman. Men that get the wrong idea reading this and say, we men are superior and we really don't need women. Okay? To any man who would say that, I would say, just exactly how do you think you got here in the first place? Through the woman. Nor is the woman independent of man. We depend on each other. That's how God created the human race, which, by the way, is the only race in humanity. And we are equal. And it doesn't matter if you are tall and good looking or if you're ugly like me. We are equal in God's creation of things. Men, women, there's no room for sexism in God's design. To be a sexist is to be ungodly. There's no room for racism in God's design. To be a racist is ungodly. At the foot of the cross, humanity stands on equal ground. We are all sinners by nature. Jesus Christ died that we may be saved by grace, simply by believing in Jesus Christ and what he did and trusting him. So we are dependent, and we are dependent because of the Lord. See, God actually is better than us. He's not dependent on his creation. He doesn't need us at all. We need him, and we need each other. But men and women are equal beings as displayed not only in their dependence, they're also equal beings as displayed in their creation. Let's go back to creation again. In verse 12, for as woman came from the man, and again, that is Eve coming from Adam, right? However, it says, so man also comes through the woman. That's birth. So not only are they displayed, their equality displayed in their creation, but thirdly displayed in their birth. Men need to be born. To be born, you got to have a woman in the picture. They're trying. They're really working hard to figure out how a man can give birth to somebody. But that's not God's design. That's not God's order of things. His natural order is we come through a woman, right? So the birth even displays equality. And then their equality is also displayed in their position under God. Did you notice the last part of verse 12? But all things are from God. And there it is again. Everybody stands on equal ground under God. Everybody. Right? And that makes us equal. Problem is people don't think they're equal. People think they're better, higher, greater. And of course, you can swing the pendulum the other way too, which is why Scripture says you shouldn't think of yourself any more lowly than you ought to. That's not really being accurate. Consider what you are in Christ. Under God, you will see equality. You will see that God has made you an equal being with every other being. Different roles, different talents, different gifts, different aptitudes. Absolutely. But equal as creations under God. So this is all coming off of the principle that within God's design of the church there is a hierarchy without superiority, and that men and women have different roles. Men have the role of leadership. There's some observations I want to make with this. This is going to take us back to verse 10. It says, for this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. The word symbol is not actually in the original language, but it's very obvious that's the idea here. The woman ought to have an authority on her head because of the angels. Observation number one, the head coverings that are mentioned in this text are symbols of the unchanging principle of verse 3. The principle doesn't change, okay? The principle remains the same, and that is there is a hierarchy without superiority in the church, but the principle is displayed by a symbol in what they wore, okay? So the head coverings, just a symbol, all right? Easter, a lot of our ladies wear hats. We have a few that wore them today. It is really common to wear an Easter. It used to be more common all the time. And back then, these women wore head coverings every time they got together at church. Okay, they were going to pray. There's going to be prophesying. They got together and they wore these veils or these symbols over their heads. Okay, that's one observation. Observation number two, in verse 10, the angels themselves observed this principle. It says, because of the angels. There's another verse where, what in the world did you mean by that, Paul? Okay. Because of the angels. A lot has been suggested for what this means. Certainly, angels are present in our assembly according to this. Okay, this is when we come together, we have church, the angels are witnessing this. Now, isn't that something? I think that God's angels are watching this right now, and they're watching me, and they're listening, and they're watching you. Are you listening? Okay? They're here. Now, some have suggested, well, the reason that women are to wear veils or hats over their heads is because this is actually a reference to unholy angels, demons, and they're tempted to lust after women who aren't wearing their veils. Well, I would consider that ridiculous because modesty is not the issue here. The veils have nothing to do with modesty. Modesty is covered in other parts of the New Testament. But this has nothing to do with modesty. The veils have to do with a symbol for recognizing one's role in the church. Okay? So probably not unholy angels. Others have suggested the word angels is actually reference to pastors because it might be like in Revelation, the word angels could be a reference to pastors. The word angel simply means a messenger, and a pastor in preaching the word is a messenger. There could be some credibility to that here in light of the fact we're talking about hierarchy, and the pastor is in a leadership role, quite possibly. I think most likely, though, what Paul is simply saying is that angels watch what we do, because 1 Peter 1:12 makes that very clear, that holy angels look upon our assembly. They observe salvation. They long to look into it. They're learning at what God's doing because we are what God is doing, so they watch us. And so Paul is saying, God's watching this principle played out, and his angels are watching this principle played out. That brings a whole new light to the idea of I never truly am alone. Never truly am alone. Right? That little bit of knowledge all by itself can improve your character. Now here's some questions that I have. Okay, or here's the question. This is the question that people come up with when we read all of this about hats and that sort of thing. Long hair and all that. Is the symbol of head coverings, women wearing hats, is the symbol of head coverings a biblical mandate? A biblical mandate is love one another, forgive one another as Christ has forgiven you, observing communion, be baptized. These are all commands. They're universal. They apply to every church, no matter where in points in history this church exists. Is covering of the head, we know it's a symbol, but is practicing the symbol a biblical mandate for all churches whenever and wherever they are? Or is the symbol of head coverings a cultural symbol at that time? See, now you're stuck, aren't you? You got to be real careful when it comes to the cultural argument. Because a lot of times people will raise the cultural argument when they see something in the Bible they just don't like. The whole idea that spiritual leadership in the church, pastors and deacons, other things like that, are limited to men is not popular. And so many Christians have made the argument when Paul wrote those words, that was just a cultural mandate because at that time, female pastors wouldn't have worked. But times have changed. Well, we've already dismembered that argument by seeing that the role of male leadership in the church goes all the way back to creation. It has nothing to do with culture at the time. But it's easy to do that with anything in Scripture that you don't like. Well, that just applies to the culture. So you got to be really careful with the cultural argument. So if this is not cultural and it's a biblical mandate, then just about every woman in here, except about 4 of them, are disobeying God's word by not wearing a hat right now, right? So, is it cultural or is it biblical? Well, most Christians would believe this to be cultural, and I do too, okay? And here's why. Instructions that are mandated, they tend to repeat themselves. Things like be baptized, that comes up again. The instructions on communion repeat themselves. Loving one another and how to do it, that comes up over and over and over and over in the New Testament. How to be saved, the instruction of salvation is by grace and not by works. That repeats itself several times. And again and again and again, you see so many of the biblical mandates that apply to every Christian everywhere and every point of history. They're repeated. But women in hats or veils, when they go to church, that doesn't come up again. It's only found here, and so in all likelihood it's because it was a cultural situation that was going on there. Okay? Now, most Christians believe this. Not all. There's a church went to in South Carolina. It's a big church, solid church, a really good church. Okay? Went there on an evening service. When I say big, there are 400, maybe 400 members there, 400 people in attendance. Went into this church on a Sunday evening service and noticed right away, probably about 8 out of 10 women wore hats. I mean, everywhere from hats like what Chelsea's got on here to just the little prayer caps, little white veil, little prayer cap. 8 out of 10 wore that, which tells you what? Obviously, most of the women in this church took 1 Corinthians 11 to be a biblical mandate, not a cultural one. Right? This was not a legalistic church, not by a long shot. First of all, they had a full-blown 40 or 50 member choir and a full orchestra in the evening service. They sang songs of traditional hymns as well as some modern hymns. You had the hymn book, and they also sang everything off the screen. They had all the words on the screen as well. The pastor, who's been there over 2 decades, solid preacher. There's nothing legalistic about this church. But at least 8 out of 10 women were convinced that women should be wearing hats when they go to church in obedience to 1 Corinthians 11. But about 2 out of 10 evidently didn't believe so. And somehow this church got along just fine. My guess is they read 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10 before they read 1 Corinthians 11. That would be my guess. So this wasn't a problem. So I'm just telling you, most Christians would believe this is cultural, not biblical. Now, if you've changed on that as a result of this sermon, well, then I would expect to see you in a hat every Sunday, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. But if you believe it's cultural, okay, then I have 2 more observations to make. Observation number 3, since a woman having her head covered at church is cultural, so too is a man having his head uncovered at church cultural as well. It is our natural custom to come into church and take off our hat, isn't it, men? Or if we pray, we're outside and we're going to pray for lunch, hats come off. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you hold to that and say, well, that's biblically mandated, that men got to take their hat off, because look what it says in 1 Corinthians 11. Well, to say that it's a biblical mandate for men to take their hats off when they pray, but it is a cultural mandate for women to put their hats on is inconsistent. You can't have it both ways, right? But in our culture and in our custom, it is natural for us to remove our hats when we pray, right? Or when we come into church. And it is also natural for women, if they so choose, to wear a hat and to keep it on when they come into church. Right? Now, don't you boys go home and say, see, Mom, Pastor Dave says I can wear my ball cap when I go to church. No, I did not say that. All right? Okay? And observation number 4 that I'm going to make is exactly why. And observation 4 is this. Did you notice Paul gave weight to cultural symbols of respect? He gave weight to them. Symbols themselves change, for sure. But the symbols have weight. So, in our culture, young men, it is a considerate and respectful thing to remove your hat when you come into church or when you pray or something like that. Okay? And Paul gave this symbol, if we're going to believe this symbol is purely cultural and is just a symbol, he gave it weight. In verse 5, every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. Let her shave her head bald. But if it's shameful for a woman to shave her head bald or be shorn, then let her put a hat on. Let her be covered. All right? That is showing respect for the culture and the symbol of that time and place. And that's something that's lost with many Christians today. Let's jump ahead from Paul's letter, 1800 years to the Victorian era. How did women dress for church in the 1800s? Well, they wore dresses that dragged on the ground, okay? And the sleeves went all the way to the hand with ruffles, and they came all the way up to a collar, usually with ruffles. Even in the middle of summer, they dressed like this, right? Okay? And that was considered in that culture a sign of respect, and it showed a woman that she understood her God-given role when she came to God's house of worship and prayer. All right? Now, this jump up ahead, another couple hundred years, how does a conservative woman dress to church today? Well, she may wear a skirt, okay, that goes to the knee. She may have a really nice blouse on, short sleeves maybe, with an open collar that shows the necklace, right? And she may wear stilettos or pumps or something like that, some type of heel. And then you take that woman that's very conservative, or she might even wear slacks. You take that woman and you put her back in time to the 1800s and send her to church, okay? See, in that situation, Paul would have been talking about, she might as well shave her head if she's going to wear a hat. He would say, if she's going to dress like that to church, then she might as well be a saloon girl. Because in that culture, that's the way it was viewed. In this culture, it's not. You see what I'm saying? But what we've gotten into is saying, hey, the Bible didn't tell me that I have to wear a tie. Well, that's not the attitude Paul had towards the symbols of the day. Right? Symbols change. So, if the symbols of the tie demonstrates respect in your culture, throw a tie on. But if it doesn't, don't. Williams, Arizona, I went to church there a couple of years ago. Williams, Arizona is a ranching country. Right? The members of this church were ranchers, farmers, and they don't own a tie. They don't have a silk tie. They don't own a suit. Their Sunday best is their nice boots that still hold polish. Their blue jeans that are still blue and don't have any holes in them. And they wear, crisp shirts. They might wear a bolo tie with an open collar checkered shirt. And that's their Sunday best. And somebody dressed like me walking out of their church will look very out of place. And so the pastor, he also wore really nice, in the pulpit, he wore really nice jeans, fresh blue, dark blue jeans, and a really crisp denim shirt and a nice vest. And in that culture, that was respectful, okay? So to disregard the cultural symbols of respect is not what Paul did, because to do so is to disregard people. That's what manners are all about, folks. Manners are they're actually moral. Well, there's no mandate for me in the Bible to open a door for a woman. No, but when you open a door for a woman in our culture, it's saying, you know what? You first. I'm last. That's honorable. That's respectful. And that is moral. Whatever the cultural symbol is, do it. And it changes. In our culture, man, when you eat at the table, you keep your mouth closed. Right? Of course, it's not a problem when after you're done eating, you sit back with your toothpick hanging out of your mouth like this. That's okay. You know, in Hong Kong, it's just the reverse. When they eat, man, they don't even use the chopsticks. They just shovel it in, you know, talking the whole time and stuff. You know, blah, 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 blah. And then when they pull out the toothpicks, they do it like this. And they don't want anyone to see them picking their teeth. This is just the reverse. Keep that in mind if you go overseas. Okay? And what Paul is saying is, notice what's natural and customary in your culture that shows respect, and do it. And get off your horse and say, you're not messing with my freedoms. This is what I'm allowed to do. Better go back to 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10. And that's where the Corinthians were going wrong. I think a lot of Christians are going wrong that way today as well. So there is equality in God's local church, absolutely. There's different roles that God ordained. Hierarchy without superiority. There's cultural customs that we have. They display respect for God and his design and his principles, right? And when we give weight to the customs, we actually give weight to each other and show honor that way. So here in God's church, we do what we do and we even wear what we wear. Not so much to honor ourselves like the soldier, there's a place for that, but to honor God and to honor each other. So we don't wear medals to say, look how I've been honored. We wear what we wear to say, I'm honoring you and I'm honoring him. That's the Christian way of wearing honor. Father, we thank you again. We praise you. We ask for forgiveness, Lord, when we dishonor you by dishonoring each other in various ways. May we put aside our preferences and even our freedoms when necessary to build bridges with each other and to build bridges with others instead of building walls. We praise you, God. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So stretch your legs as we close with I Saw Jesus in You. you may be seated. Again, we're going to put the love offering box in the back. And as you leave, if you have a love offering, feel free to drop it right in there. I'm going to ask Caleb if he set that out there for us right in the middle aisle. And I'll dismiss you row by row. Barb plays. Thanks, Barb.